It wasn't the volume of her voice that caught me off guard. It was the precision. She stood across the kitchen island, arms folded, eyes steady but distant. We just finished discussing her sudden plan to fly to Portland for a weekend self-care retreat I hadn't heard about until she'd already booked it. I'd asked why she hadn't told me sooner, not to control, just to be in the loop. Her response came sharp and cool. Your boundaries feel like pressure. That was all she said. Then she turned back to her tea, like she hadn't just set something on fire and walked away from it. It wasn't a shout, not even a raised tone, but it landed harder than if she'd screamed in my face. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to even respond to. The phrasing twisted the ground under my feet, like she'd swapped the map of our marriage while I was still trying to read it. Boundaries were how we protected things, I thought, how we honored each other, what we built trust around. Control? I didn't speak, partly because I didn't trust what would come out if I did, but mostly because I wasn't sure what had just happened. She didn't follow up. No explanation. No apology. Just moved through the rest of the evening like we hadn't just slipped onto opposing teams. Later that night, I lay in bed beside her, eyes open while she scrolled her phone. The silence between us wasn't new, couples have lulls, but this wasn't that. This was a shift, a quiet redefining. I thought about what she'd said, replaying it in my head. My boundaries feel like control, not where control felt like it. A soft assertion wrapped in plausible deniability. She'd left herself just enough room to say later she didn't mean it that way. But she did. And the more I sat with it, the more I understood. She was building a defense, preemptively justifying something, rewriting our dynamic before I could catch up. That was the night something settled in me. Not fury. Not even heartbreak yet. Just stillness. I realized if she wanted to recast my steadiness as possessiveness, she was no longer seeing me clearly. And if that was true, I had to stop assuming we were on the same page. So I did the one thing she hadn't expected. I said nothing. But I started watching everything. A week later, she made weekend plans without asking. Not that she ever needed permission, she used to say it herself. It's not about asking, it's about respecting each other's time. That line had vanished. She told me Friday morning that she'd be out of town with some friends, just like someone informing a neighbor they'd be gone in case a package arrived. She didn't ask if I had anything planned, didn't wonder if I needed the car. Just stated it, tossed a duffel in the back seat, and kissed my cheek like we were casual acquaintances. I didn't question it. I smiled, nodded, and waved her off with the same calmness I used to meet deadlines at work. Controlled, professional, but not detached, just alert. She came back Sunday night at 10:30. No apology for the late arrival, no warmth in the hello. She was tired, she said, and I let her go straight to bed. I watched her unpack with that same emotional distance surgeons use. Precise, dispassionate, and already planning the next step. The pattern settled in. She began announcing things instead of discussing them. Dinner plans made with friends without including me. Yoga classes that bled into wine nights. Vacation she forgot to mention until the flights were already booked. She stopped sharing things with me and started broadcasting them to others, our mutual friends, her family, even social media. I'd find out our anniversary weekend was now a solo, renewal trip, only because I saw a tag post from her cousin. So proud of her for choosing herself. Choosing herself from what, exactly? The bitterness tempted me. I felt it tug at my gut late at night, whispering curses I didn't want to believe. But I never gave it oxygen. I journaled it, then locked it away. There wasn't room for rage. Not yet. I needed clarity more than vindication. So I let her move. I watched the currents shift. I didn't press. I gave her what she said she wanted: space, autonomy, independence. But I didn't give her blindness. I began logging it. Dates, times, comments that contradicted previous ones, places she went without explanation. Not obsessively, methodically, like documenting a pattern before the numbers added up to something undeniable. She thought I was backing off. I wasn't. I was just letting her build the picture with her own hands, one action at a time. She began to forget things. Not small things, not where she left her keys or whether she'd fed the dog. These were the kinds of forgettings that left marks. She forgot to call when her flight landed in Denver. I saw the timestamp on her Instagram story before I saw her message. I didn't reply. She sent a casual, "Made it safely," an hour later, with a smiling selfie and a drink already in hand. I told her to enjoy herself. Nothing more. The next week, she changed dinner plans we had with my colleagues. I only found out when I texted her to confirm the time and got a casual, "Oh, I told them we couldn't make it. I need a night for myself." No warning. No discussion. Just a quiet rewriting of agreements. Each time I noted the shift, she framed it as self-care. Reclaiming independence. Stepping into her whole self. I wasn't angry yet. Not on the surface. But under the calm, something colder had started to form. Not hate, detachment, precision. She thought she was slipping loose from something oppressive. What she didn't see was that she was cutting away the only rope keeping her anchored. I stopped offering reminders. I let her stumble. I watched her lie to others about where she was, then casually correct herself around me. No shame, no tension. Just quiet confidence that I wouldn't push. She wasn't testing the relationship anymore. She was testing the boundaries of how far she could erase the version of me she no longer needed, or thought she didn't. The irony was sharp. She'd accused me of control, and yet here she was, rewriting the rules mid-game, shifting definitions, recasting basic consideration as a cage she needed to break from. I began keeping a private log, not just times and dates, but tone, language shifts, phrases like, "I don't owe you a rundown of my life," and "You wouldn't understand, you don't get what freedom means." Each time she pushed the line, she smiled a little wider. As if she was winning something. As if I'd been vanquished in some moral debate I never agreed to be part of. But I wasn't losing. I was building. Because if she wanted to redefine my care as control, then I needed to stop offering explanations. I stopped clarifying my silence. I let her think she was drifting into power. What she didn't realize was that I'd already stepped out of the current. And I was watching her float towards something she didn't see coming. It was 2:07 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of her laugh. Soft, breathy, and not meant for me. She was lying beside me, phone tilted toward her chest, screen dimmed, but still glowing. Her thumb moved quickly, tapping back a response before she rolled onto her side and exhaled with that lingering smirk she used to save for our private jokes. I didn't say anything. I turned my head slightly, just enough to catch the name on her lock screen before it faded to black. Eli. I didn't know an Eli. The next morning, she was chipper, made coffee, hummed to herself. She kissed the top of my head like nothing had shifted in the night. And maybe for her, it hadn't. Maybe secrecy was now second nature, another form of independence she could claim without guilt. She left her phone on the nightstand while she showered. Normally, I wouldn't have touched it. We'd always had a silent agreement, privacy meant trust. But that morning, I felt something else, the need for truth. I didn't dig deep, just enough. Opened the recent messages, scrolled a week back. Laughter. Inside jokes. A photo of him holding a coffee with a caption, "Fuel for round 2. Winking emojis. A blurry picture of her legs across his lap, framed by the corner of what definitely wasn't our couch. My stomach didn't drop. It anchored. Everything that had felt foggy snapped into focus. She hadn't just drifted. She jumped, quietly, deliberately, with someone who had no stake in the years we'd built. Still, I didn't confront her. I closed the phone, placed it back exactly as it was, and left the room before she stepped out of the shower. She joked later about the steam making her hair a mess. I smiled and told her it looked fine. Inside, something broke clean. This wasn't about a single betrayal. This was about rewriting our entire foundation under the guise of freedom. She called it growth, healing. But healing doesn't involve sneaking around with someone you hide from your partner. I spent the rest of the day moving through the motions, responding to emails, holding meetings, nodding through small talk, but I wasn't there. I was mapping next steps. This wasn't rage. Rage was sloppy. This was strategy. I knew now who Eli was. But what I needed to understand was who she had become, and how long she'd been building this exit under the disguise of personal evolution. She thought I was passive. She hadn't realized I was preparing. That night, while she scrolled beside me in bed, I opened my laptop in the living room and made a list. Not of suspicions, those were over. This was logistics now. I listed every shared account, every access point, every asset with her name attached to it. No anger, no panic, just quiet cataloging, the way you'd itemize before a sale. Or a storm. I started with the bank accounts, the joint ones we'd opened early in our marriage when merging lives felt romantic. I moved the bulk of my income into a separate, newly created account. One she didn't know about. I left enough in the joint pool to keep appearances normal. Bills, subscriptions, her comfort. Next was the safe. I relocated important documents, titles, passports, the savings bonds my father left me. They went into a private storage unit I rented in cash. I didn't remove everything. That would raise flags. I left decoys, just enough to make the safe look full. Then I contacted an attorney. It wasn't a full legal step yet. Just a conversation. A consultation. I laid out the facts calmly, methodically. No dramatic story. No accusations. Just quiet questions about asset protection, documentation protocols, and exit strategies. The attorney took notes. Asked careful questions. She'd heard stories like mine before, but mine wasn't a story yet. It was a plan in motion. Back at home, she was more relaxed than I'd seen her in months. She played music in the kitchen, left wine glasses out, walked around barefoot, humming. She thought space had healed us, that my silence meant peace. It didn't. It meant I was closing a door she didn't realize was hers. She didn't notice the missing financial access. Didn't ask about the safe. She floated through the days, mistaking my distance for submission. But I was observing, taking notes. She posted something online that week, a filtered selfie, eyes bright, captioned, "Learning to live without permission." Her friends liked it. Her sister commented a string of hearts. I screenshotted it. Not for leverage, for clarity, for the record. It was all becoming clearer. She wasn't just slipping. She was stepping away on purpose, documenting her own disconnection with every post, every overshare, every secret plan disguised as empowerment. She thought I was fading quietly. She hadn't realized I was building the floor she was about to fall through. She began dressing differently. Not in a dramatic way, not overnight, but in a calculated evolution. High heels returned to her wardrobe. Lipstick during daytime errands. Jewelry she hadn't touched in years suddenly gleaming again on her collarbone. I didn't comment. She wanted me to. She left the house on Saturday evenings with an energy that used to be reserved for our date nights. Hair curled, phone clutched tightly, perfume trailing in the air long after the door shut behind her. "Going to meet the girls," she'd say, smiling without looking at me. I'd nod from the couch, a book open but unread in my lap, tracking the exits. On social media, she transformed into a spokesperson for reinvention. Quotes about letting go. Posts about outgrowing small expectations. A lengthy caption beneath a photo of her standing on a rooftop at sunset, arms wide. "Healing doesn't always look soft. Sometimes it looks like choosing yourself, even when others call it selfish." I screenshotted that too. She was crafting a narrative, one where she'd been stifled, boxed in, and finally brave enough to claim her power. It was curated rebellion, preemptive justification, and the more public it got, the more I understood her next move would be private, and worse. I still said nothing. At night, we shared a bed like strangers at a halfway house. She'd fall asleep facing the wall, her breathing steady. I'd lie beside her, wide awake, listening to the absence between us. That kind of silence isn't natural. It's built, layer by layer, through omissions, withheld touches, conversations aborted before they begin. I stopped asking where she was going. I stopped texting to check if she'd be late. She interpreted it as surrender. It wasn't. It was evidence. Everything she shared with the world was a breadcrumb back to the version of her she wanted people to believe. But I had the map she didn't think I'd draw, the one behind the curtain, the one built from passwords, location pings, changes in banking behavior, and the man named Eli who was still messaging her late at night. One evening, she looked at me over dinner, pasta she barely touched, wine she refilled 3 times, and said, "You've been really calm lately." I met her gaze and smiled. "I'm just giving you space." She smiled back, almost relieved. She thought she'd won something. She hadn't yet seen the boundary I'd drawn, the final one. The one she was walking straight into. It was easier than I expected. I installed the tracking tool through a forgotten family locator app we both still had access to. It wasn't concealed, just overlooked, like so many things she assumed I wouldn't notice. I watched her location ping off the same address 3 nights in a row. A luxury condo on the east side, 23 minutes from our home. Not a restaurant. Not a yoga studio. Just one unit. Consistently. Quietly. I didn't confront her. I verified. Screenshots, timestamps, traffic logs. I watched her leave the house dressed for book club, and arrive at that address 20 minutes later. I recorded the departures, the hours, the patterns. I wasn't looking for gotchas. I was building a timeline. Then came the messages. I recovered backups from the cloud, something she hadn't bothered to fully disable. And there it was. A conversation with Eli that didn't even try to hide. He'd sent her a picture of a key. She replied with a heart. He wrote, "It's easier when you're not pretending," she responded. "I'm not pretending anymore." One thread led to another. Archived chats, deleted photos, resent messages synced to her laptop's backup folder. I scrolled through months of it. Subtle beginnings, quiet flirtations, inside jokes that became late-night wishes. Then meetings, then trips. She hadn't stumbled. She had plotted. Slowly, carefully, and in her mind virtuously. Every moment she'd called my concern. Controlling. She'd already been seeking permission elsewhere. From someone who didn't have to manage real life with her. No shared bank account, no long-haul commitments, no conflict about family obligations or career goals. Just curated evenings and filtered photos. I wasn't devastated. I was clear. I kept the documentation structured. Financial records showing hotel charges under aliases. Location matches. Shared dinners on her credit card when she claimed to be with friends. I didn't need to trap her. I needed the truth to be bulletproof. She still kissed my cheek in the mornings. Still asked if I wanted almond milk when she ran to the store. Still played the part of a woman, reclaiming herself, through healthy distance. She never imagined I knew. That was her mistake. She thought silence meant submission. What she didn't realize was that I was past trying to pull her back. I wasn't chasing anything anymore. I was building the frame for a final conversation she couldn't walk away from. One where every word I spoke would be backed by facts, not fury. And when that moment came, she wouldn't be able to call it control. It would be called truth. I stopped reacting. Not emotionally, that had already gone numb weeks ago, but tactically. I moved into full preparation mode. My calendar changed. Morning runs became calls with a second attorney, one who specialized in asset preservation during dissolutions. I learned which accounts she had rights to and which she didn't. I froze her access to anything that could be leveraged. Quietly. Legally. She didn't notice. At work, I adjusted direct deposit instructions, split earnings between secure holdings, began consolidating business assets into a protected structure, a trust that no longer bore both our names. She hadn't earned that seat. Not anymore. I met with a forensic accountant in a sterile office overlooking the city. He reviewed my growing file, bank statements, time logs, digital conversations, photos, location pings. He flipped through them without comment for 10 full minutes. Then he looked up and said, "You're in control. Stay that way." I intended to. Back home, she seemed freer than ever. She danced barefoot in the kitchen to music I used to play for her. She wore his perfume. I recognized the brand from one of the photos she didn't know I'd seen. She poured us wine one night and toasted to growth, her eyes sparkling with the ease of someone who thought she'd rewritten history. I raised my glass and clinked hers. "To truth," I said. She laughed. "Always." She didn't notice I hadn't taken a sip. I filed the final documentation 2 days later. My legal team had what they needed: proof of misconduct, financial trail, clear abandonment of marital agreements. The papers were signed, sealed, and waiting. She still had no idea. Emotionally, I'd stepped out of the marriage already. Whatever love remained had calcified, not into hate, but into resolve. I wasn't mourning anymore. I was safeguarding. I spent quiet nights reviewing our past, not with longing, but with a kind of autopsy precision. I looked at our early texts, photos from vacations, smiles that, in hindsight, were already fraying. I didn't delete them. I archived them. They were evidence, too, of who we had been before she decided that boundaries were restrictions and freedom meant secrecy. There's a difference between moving on and escaping. She was escaping. I was moving forward with purpose. She thought this phase of silence meant reconciliation. She didn't understand it was the staging area for a revelation that would leave no room for denial. I chose Thursday night. She liked Thursdays, said they felt like a soft launch into the weekend. A perfect time for a reset dinner, as she once called it. So I used the familiar rhythm against her. I made reservations at a small Italian place she used to love. Quiet, dark wood candles. We hadn't been there in over a year. When I told her about it, she tilted her head and smiled, surprised but pleased. This feels nice, she said, touching my arm. Like old times, I nodded. Exactly. She wore a navy dress I hadn't seen in a while, the kind she used to wear for business dinners we attended together. She added new earrings, a recent gift from Eli, though she didn't know I'd recognize them. She'd once posted a thank you photo on her story, tagging a boutique linked to his neighborhood. The detail didn't slip by me. Nothing had for weeks. We ordered wine, talked lightly. She seemed relieved, almost giddy. She probably thought the storm had passed. That distance had softened me. That maybe, just maybe, I'd forgotten. I smiled when she laughed, nodded when she talked about upcoming plans. I feel like we've turned a corner, she said, her fingers grazing the stem of her glass. I feel that too, I said, reaching into my jacket. Her eyes lit up. I saw the flicker of hope, maybe even nostalgia. Then she saw the envelope. I slid it across the table slowly. Not dramatic, not accusatory, just a gesture. Neutral, quiet, inevitable. What's this? She asked, her voice light, but I saw the tension creep into her posture. I held her gaze. Everything you've hidden, and everything I've documented. She blinked. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked it up. She opened the flap and pulled out the pages, thick, organized, clipped into sections. Texts, photos, bank statements, location logs, a letter from my attorney. Her hand hovered over the last page, the marital resolution paperwork. She didn't speak. I leaned back, hands steady. You said my boundaries felt like restriction, I said softly. But all they ever were was protection from this. She didn't look up. She didn't have to. Her silence was the first honest thing she'd given me in months. She turned each page with the delicacy of someone disarming a device she didn't understand. I watched her eyes move, stall, dart again, her breath shallowing as the evidence accumulated in her hands. There was no shouting, no gasps, just the mechanical sound of paper shifting and the slow collapse of whatever story she told herself to survive the double life she thought she'd camouflaged. When she reached the bottom of the stack, she paused. Resting atop the final page, the divorce filing, was a yellow sticky note. It read in my handwriting. My boundaries weren't control. They were protection. She stared at it longer than I expected. Her face, which had always been so expressive, was now unreadable, flat. The charm, the smirks, the curated vulnerability she wore like armor, gone. Replaced by something closer to calculation, interrupted by disbelief. Finally, she set the papers down carefully, aligning the edges with a strange reverence. Her voice cracked the silence. You didn't have to do this. I nodded slowly, keeping my tone even. I didn't want to. But you left no option. She reached for her wine but didn't drink. Her hands trembled slightly, and she steadied them on the table. You've been building this, she said, almost to herself. All this time? Yes. She gave a short, breathless laugh, not amused, just stunned. How long have you known? Long enough to stop asking why and start preparing. She looked up sharply at that. Her eyes searched mine, as if hoping to find some crack, some sign of softness, maybe even doubt. There wasn't any left. She shifted in her seat. I didn't think you'd. No, I interrupted gently. You didn't think. You assumed I'd stay silent, that I'd bend, that you could rewrite what marriage meant while still calling it love. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her lip trembled, but she bit it. This wasn't remorse. It was shock. The realization that she wasn't going to get the emotional high ground she'd counted on. I thought you'd understand, she tried. That maybe we could talk about. This is the talk, I said. The documents speak louder than excuses. We sat there in silence. Other couples talked, laughed, toasted. Waiters moved between tables. No one noticed our quiet undoing. She folded the envelope slowly, almost delicately, like it might vanish if she handled it gently enough. But nothing was disappearing. She had asked for life without boundaries, and now she had it. She followed me into the parking lot. The cool air hit her hard. I saw it in the way her arms crossed instantly, not from cold, but instinct. Like she was suddenly aware of how exposed she'd become. Wait, she said, her voice low, urgent. Can we not do this here? I turned calm, measured. Not do what? Speak plainly? Her eyes were wide now. Not pleading, not defiant, something between disorientation and disbelief. She wasn't used to being the one caught without a script. This wasn't the moment she'd imagined. No tearful confrontation. No bitter yelling match she could later point to as proof of my harshness. Just silence, steel, and paperwork. She moved closer. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't step back. But it did. Because you removed the very thing keeping you grounded. She blinked. What does that mean? I took a breath and looked her directly in the eye. I built this life with you. Protected it. Us. You called my care controlling. But what you actually resented was accountability. I didn't resent. She started, but stopped when she saw I wasn't going to interrupt. So I continued. I gave you space. You filled it with someone else. I gave you trust. You used it as cover. And when I asked questions, you framed them as proof I was the problem. She opened her mouth again, but there was nothing to say. Not anymore. Not after what had been shown in black and white. Not after she'd seen the tracking logs, the overlapping financial records, the late-night texts written like a shared joke at my expense. This doesn't have to be war, she said, softer now, reaching for something, anything to control. It won't be, I said evenly. Because I've already removed the leverage. You won't find leverage here. Only truth, and accountability. She looked away, jaw tightening, then back at me. Her voice broke. You don't know what it was like, feeling unseen. That landed. Not because it was new, but because it was old. It was the same note she'd played when she started pulling away. But back then, I'd listened with open hands. I'd changed what I could. I'd softened. She'd vanished anyway. I see you now, I said, clearly. That's the difference. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. But her posture shifted. Shoulders slumped slightly, gaze lowered. The collapse wasn't dramatic. It was internal. Subtle. The unraveling of a story she'd written and rehearsed, now falling apart under the weight of facts she couldn't spin. I walked to the car. She didn't follow. That was when I knew she'd finally understood. Control was never mine. It had always been hers. She just lost track of it when she mistook destruction for freedom. Freedom didn't look the way she thought it would. Within 2 months, the threads began to pull. The man she'd risked everything for, Eli, faded. No dramatic breakup. Just silence. Delays in responses. A removed tag. I didn't need to watch closely. She made it public when she unfollowed him, then posted a quote about learning that not everyone who lifts you up wants to hold you. She moved out of our house, technically my house now. I'd secured the title cleanly, legally. Her name removed through documented misconduct. No drawn-out court battle. No contested claims. Just signatures, facts, and a file of damning clarity that left her no foothold to fight. She tried to hold on to the social narrative, the empowered woman reclaiming her identity. But the story didn't hold under the weight of isolation. The invites slowed. Her sister stopped commenting on her posts. Mutual friends, once swayed by her version, drifted back into neutrality, or silence. The man who'd been her escape plan wasn't built for reality. He didn't want the life, just the thrill of being someone's exit route. Once she stepped fully into the open, he disappeared. And there she stood, independent, alone. She learned what real stability looks like. Not dominance over someone, but the strength to stand alone, with clarity, not illusion. And I finally had mine back.